Ever notice how Alice Cullen, like, completely breaks the mold when you think about typical vampires?
Right.
We're diving deep into all your research on her, trying to figure out what makes her tick.
It's so interesting how she's this cheerful, upbeat vampire when you think about the usual image of like a brooding, ancient creature of the
The
night.
total opposite.
The source material does a really good job at showing us how the stuff she went through, especially early on, really shaped who she becomes, as this vibrant, optimistic vampire.
And we have to unpack that because her human life, I mean, it was rough.
Yeah.
The source material does not hold back. It's heartbreaking when you think about what she went through as a kid, having these visions of the future, but instead of people understanding, they think she's mentally ill.
Right. And then she gets institutionalized. It's easy to kind of skim over those darker parts of her story.
Yeah.
But the source material makes a point of highlighting how deeply those early traumas affected her, that isolation, the fear. It makes her transformation into a vampire even more powerful. It wasn't a loss for her. It was freedom. She escaped the darkness that had followed her throughout her human life.
It's like her devotion to family, her longing for joy and connection. It all makes so much more sense when you see it through that lens.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that need comes from being deprived of it for so long.
100%. It adds this whole other layer to her, On the surface, she's carefree, but underneath,
There's more to it.
way more to it. Take her love for fashion, for example.
A lot of parties, yeah.
It's not just a superficial thing. It's her way of reclaiming the joy that was stolen from her as a human.
Wow, when you put it that way.
It makes you think, right?
It's like she's not just embracing life, she's rebelling against the darkness she came from by surrounding herself with all this beauty and light.
Exactly. And then there's the whole James situation. We can't forget about that. This wasn't just some random vampire attack. It was a pivotal moment for her.
This is where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because in the movies, it's one thing, but the source material suggests that there was a much deeper connection between Alice and James.
Definitely.
Like their paths were intertwined long before they actually met. But the big question is, why was Alice targeted by a tracker in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question. Was it a coincidence? Or was there something about Alice, even back then as a human, that made her a target?
Interesting.
Could there have been a premonition, some whisper of their future encounter that drew them together? It makes you wonder if there are these larger forces at play in her life, even before she became a vampire.
It's like fate or destiny, you know?
Exactly. And that's something we see again and again with Alice.
So she gets away from James.
Right?
And that leads to her, becoming a vampire.
Exactly.
Which, as we said, wasn't this big, horrible thing for her. It was more like she was free.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the source material describes how she looks.
Uh-huh.
Because it's like the opposite of what you think of with vampires. She's like this tiny, graceful being, almost like a fairy or something.
Yeah. Not the scary monster we usually imagine.
Exactly. And it's not just how she looks, it's her whole personality, too.
Right. Like she's bubbly, energetic.
The life of the party, always.
But then you remember her gift, and it's like, wow, that's a lot to handle.
Oh, absolutely.
Speaking of her gift, we should talk more about that.
Yes, it's not as simple as it seems, her being able to see the future.
Right. It's not like a crystal ball or something.
The source material really emphasizes that these visions she has, they change all the time.
Because of
free will. People make choices, and those choices change things.
Can you imagine knowing what might happen, good or bad, but never being totally sure?
It'd be exhausting, I bet.
Emotionally, yeah.
And the source actually gives an example of this. Remember when Alice sees Bella jumping off the cliff in New Moon?
Oh, yeah, that whole thing.
That's a perfect example of how her gift isn't perfect.
And the ethical dilemma there, too.
Exactly. Alice thinks she knows what's going to happen, she acts on it, and then, whoops, she was wrong.
It makes you think about the burden of that knowledge.
Totally.
Trying to keep everyone safe, knowing what might happen, but also knowing it could change at any second.
It's like trying to predict the weather, but instead of rain, it's someone's life.
That's a good way to put it.
And it all ties back to what we talked about before, about her needing to protect people, to bring them joy.
Because of what she went through herself, right?
Exactly. She knows how precious and fragile happiness is.
So it's not just about seeing the future for her.
No, it's about trying to make the future better, safer for the people she loves.
And that's so central to her relationship, especially with Bella.
Oh, absolutely. Their connection is fascinating.
It's really sweet in a way.
It is. Alice knows what it's like to be different, to be ostracized.
And then she meets Bella,
And she just accepts her completely.
which is such a contrast to, like, Rosalie especially.
Oh, yeah. Total opposite reaction.
But with Alice, there's that instant connection.
Like they just get each other.
Kindred spirits, right?
Totally. And Bella needs that, especially with everything she's going through, falling for a vampire, this whole new world.
It's a lot to deal with.
It is. And Alice is there for her every step of the way.
Of course, we can't forget about Jasper.
Right. He's a huge part of her life, too.
And the source material makes it clear that their connection, it goes way beyond just, like, romance.
Oh, definitely.
Deeper than that.
It's like they find peace in each other. You know?
Understanding.
Exactly.
Because they both see the world in this unique way.
And they get the challenges that come with, well, being different.
Living forever, all that.
Exactly. It's definitely a quieter kind of bond than what we see with Bella.
More subtle.
But just as important,
Totally.
they support each other, find strength in each other.
Two souls kind of drawn together by fate.
Yeah, I like that, drawn together.
And it just goes to show how complex Alice is, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
She has these deep, meaningful relationships.
With Bella, with
But
Jasper.
we're so different, you know?
Very different. And that's what makes her such a great character.
Totally. And it gets back to why people love her so much.
Even though she's a vampire in this world of supernatural stuff,
Right. It's more than that.
she represents something we can all relate to.
What do you mean?
Well, the source talks a lot about her resilience.
Which
Her ability to bounce back, you know, to find joy and hope even when things are tough.
even with her past, all the darkness she went through.
Exactly. She doesn't let it define her.
And that's inspiring,
It is. She chooses to focus on the good, to create a good future for herself.
even though she's, you know, immortal.
Even then.
Yeah.
And don't forget, she challenges everything we think we know about vampires.
How so?
She's not this scary, menacing figure.
Right. Totally different.
She proves that strength can look like a lot of things, you know?
Like her optimism.
Yes. And her loyalty to the people she loves, her determination to make things better.
She's definitely more than just the cute psychic vampire.
Right. There's so much more to her.
Speaking of her psychic abilities, the source material ends on a bit of a cliffhanger.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
It mentions that Alice's visions, they're connected to her decisions, her choices,
Okay. Yeah.
and that her own future is a mystery, even to her.
Wait, what does that even mean?
That's the question, right?
You're saying she can't even see her own future.
That's what it sounds like.
But how is that possible? She can see everyone else's.
It's like maybe she made a choice so big, so life-changing.
That even she can't see past it.
That's the idea, and it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. It's like no matter how much you know, some things are still unknown.
Even for Alice.
Exactly.
It makes you think about free will, you know?
Our choices really matter. They do. Even when it seems like things are predetermined, maybe we still have the power to change our own paths.
Just like Alice.
Exactly. And that's a pretty powerful message, if you ask me.
It is, and it's a great note to end on.
It really makes you think.
Alice Cullen. Defying expectations, spreading joy, and reminding us that we all have the power to choose our own destiny.
Even a vampire who can see the future.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive.
I agree.
It just goes to show there's always more to discover, even with characters we think we know so well.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of these deep dives, right? Always something new to learn.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the enigmatic world of Alice Cullen.
Anytime. I'm always down for a good Twilight deep dive.